I'm not a Republican. I was a libertarian. I started out as a libertarian, and I was a liaison between the Libertarian Party, the Republicans, and the Democrats, because I seemed to be one of the few as a young man who could move in between the two without much friction. One of the things that we tried to do is we worked as libertarians, we worked with the other major parties on the issues that we agreed with them on. With the Democrats, it was justice reform. Of course, now it's called a completely different thing that they're trying to do now. It's nothing but a communist revolution, and they're using justice reform practices to promote their revolution. But I assure you that what's going on in the streets is a communist revolution and has very little to do with justice reform, which does need to happen. We definitely need some new ways of dealing with criminals and arresting criminals, and that's something, it's another topic for another time, but I wanted to lay the foundation of that. I've been in politics for over 30 years. And when I moved here to Oregon, I started up with several different issues that we're working on here. The Bandon Marsh, I think I've been on this actual forum to talk about the Bandon Marsh expansion, where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came in and they tried to take over 5,000 acres. Now, the subject we're talking about today is cancel culture. And that Bandon Marsh fight was one of the first times I'd ever been attacked personally in politics. Like I said, I've been in politics for a long time, and it used to be that if you're in politics that they'll attack you when you're at the podium, they'll attack you when you're at the events, but your personal private life and your private business was just that, your private business. And people didn't bother with that as much as they do now. And now it's gone to the extreme. But one of the things that happened to me during the Bandon Marsh expansion is there was a gentleman at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service who actually spent taxpayer money to do background checks, not only on me, but several of the people who were involved in fighting against this expansion. And then they took that information and they put it out to the public. And because I've had a couple of run-ins with the law, and because, like I said, I've been very controversial, they tried to make an issue of those things so that it would deflect from the actual issue of stopping the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from taking over the marsh. Now let's fast forward to today. Today I am very active. I have a radio show, which is very important because we have several people all across the state, like Chris Brumbles. There's a gentleman in Medford. We're conservative radio show hosts who are working on local issues. I don't want to be the next Lars Larson. I don't want to be the next Rush Limbaugh. I want to be Rob Taylor here in Coos County, because I can directly affect what happens in Coos County and the 3 other counties that I reach with my radio station. And you can catch it live streaming on kwro.com. And that happens every Monday from 3 to 6. From 3 to 6 on kwro.com, you can listen to my radio show. And I bring in people from the Cato Institute, from the Mises Institute, from the Heritage Foundation. I've had last week, I think it was the week before last, I had the attorney from the Gun Owners Association, Michael Hammond, who actually helped us craft that Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance that Steve Brock was talking about at the beginning of the meeting. And so I have a lot of controversial figures on the show, but what really happened with the cancel culture is that last year, we had a group organized under the BLM and Antifa moniker. And they had some very extreme people in there. In fact, they had a professionally trained Black Marxist who came from Medford, and she's stationed here in Coos County. They're very well organized. And they were trying to organize young white people to help them with their Black Marxist revolution that she talked about at a city council meeting. I showed up at that city council meeting with what is now has become what we call them the Coos County Patriots, with about 30 guys who were ready to talk about this issue and confront the council, who was trying to push, who were being pushed by the Black Lives Matter group to pass an initiative, or not an initiative, but a resolution from the city council that was an inclusionary resolution, which stated that we, the people of Coos County, are too stupid to realize, and it wasn't exactly those words, but it was essentially saying we are too stupid to realize how racist the system is and how racist we are, and that we need to make some type of atonement for this racism. Now, it didn't say that exactly, but that's, if you read the resolution, that's what it literally meant when it stated what it stated. And so we thought this was ridiculous, because Coos County, our last sheriff before the sheriff that we have now, was a black man. I was friends with that man. His name was Andy Jackson. And not only did he become the most popular sheriff, he went on to become the most popular county commissioner that we have ever had. And he was the chair of the local Republican Party. And I used to joke with Andy. I said, you know, for a redneck county, I never understood how a black man became the man in a redneck county. And he used to joke about it and say, well, people don't judge you like that here. That this is Coos County, and we respect people, and we judge them based on their character and their merits, not by the color of their skin. This was our sheriff saying this, a black man. And he was married to a white woman. It was an interracial relationship, and he had experienced some racism. But he said that was racism directed towards him by individuals. That overall, the government itself, as far as he could tell, treated everyone equally. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to do and succeed where he succeeded. And once again, becoming the most popular commissioner, one of the most popular sheriffs that we have ever had. It was an achievement. And then to have people like the counselors on the city council of Coos Bay to basically fall prey to the mob and pass an inclusionary resolution calling all of the city a bunch of racists. Well, that was an insult to us. What it did do was it solidified a group of us. And once again, I call us the Coos County Patriots. They call us a lot of things here. And we were there with about 30 guys, and there was about 30, 40 of these BLM Antifa. They were all young. They were all under 30. And they were being led by this one woman. Her name was Jay Brown. And get this, she was the granddaughter of Willie Brown from San Francisco. So that should tell you what we're dealing with here in little old Coos County. So Jay Brown, she had organized these people under Antifa, under Black Lives Matter, and then they started another group so that they could distance themselves from the bad stuff that Antifa and Black Lives Matter does. And I believe the group was called Safer as One. And we had basically several conflicts with this group. And so what they did is they decided to go after my radio show. They couldn't go after us, a lot of the guys, because they had their own businesses. They're their own boss. There's no one to go after, because these people, these are a bunch of rednecks who drive 18-wheelers. They'll tell these people, they'll tell Black Lives Matter, just don't get caught under my wheels. I, on the other hand, having a radio show, I became the target of this group. And like I said, there's about 30 or 40 of them, and they were very prevalent on Facebook. They're young, they were under 30, and they would gang up on people. Anyone who dissented against their voice, all of these people would attack them on Facebook. I was one of those people, and I held my own pretty good. Anyone who knows me knows I can sling from the gutter just as bad as anyone else. But the problem is they started going after the radio station and all of my sponsors. I have about 11 sponsors, and 7 of them were attacked on social media, where these people would get on their website and say the most god-awful things about these people, and they were told that they better stop sponsoring my show. Now, at first, when this happens, it's kind of a shock. I mean, we're a little old county. We're not used to people just immediately attacking us. And the things they say, they were calling us racist. They were calling us chauvinist, misogynistic, Nazis, fascist, and everything in the book. You've been there. Baby killers. We were called all kinds of horrible things, and they did it on Facebook. And so you would think that most of the people on Facebook see this, and I'm sure they do. and they realize what this group is doing, because it's the same people over and over again making the comments. And they were led by this lady, Jay Brown. My sponsors are a bunch of older guys, and they've been in business for a long time. And so what had happened is that they gave these guys a reason to fight back. And I kind of liked it that they attacked my sponsors, because I've never seen my sponsors come to not just my defense, but the defense of the First Amendment, the defense to be able to sponsor whoever you want to sponsor. And who cares what someone else thinks? You are allowed to your opinion. So they had people call. In fact, one of them was a transvestite, or transgender, I think is the proper term. It was she was a female and wanted to become a male, and she had called one of my guys who's an auto mechanic. He does Tom and Gigs. His name is Tim over at Tom and Gigs. And she had called him up, and she said, well, you need to stop sponsoring Rob Taylor. And he goes, well, why? And he goes, well, he's a misogynist, and he hates homosexuals, and he hates transgender, which is not true. Not true whatsoever. I have friends who are transgender. I have friends who are homosexual. And so for her to say that was kind of hurtful, but she was saying it to Tim over at Tom and Gigs. Well, Tim's a good old boy, and he's very religious. And he said, well, you know, ma'am, I'm not going to stop sponsoring Rob Taylor. In fact, I'm probably going to double my commercials after this phone call, but I think you're abhorrent in the eyes of God. And he hung up on her. And luckily, every single one of my other sponsors had the courage to stand up to these groups. And in fact, one of my sponsors, believe it or not, is a very conservative marijuana dispensary owner. So I had a guy who was a marijuana dispensary owner who not only did he get attacked on Facebook, but they were coming into his shops here. The shop is known as Herbal Choices. And they were going into Herbal Choices to this pot shop, telling them they better stop sponsoring this fascist Rob Taylor. And in fact, he lost a couple of distributors, marijuana growers, who would no longer sell to him because he was sponsoring me. Now, I thought I was surely going to lose this guy as a support. He's one of my big sponsors, but he's a good conservative. And he said, you know, Rob, I'm not going to let anyone tell me who I can and cannot advertise with. In fact, he already kind of went through this a year earlier, because he plays Fox News on his TV monitor when you're waiting to go in and purchase your marijuana. So can you imagine that? You're going to go purchase your joint and you get to watch Sean Hannity. It's a crazy world out there. I don't make the world, I just live within it. So yeah, I just thought it was ironic that you had this pot dealer being attacked by these leftists. He stood his ground. He stood his ground, and not only did his business not go down, but he increased his business. And in fact, he said now people are coming in and thanking him for sponsoring the Rob Taylor show. So obviously I got a couple of potheads who listen to the show, but I appreciate that they go out there and actually speak up against this. So this has been something that's been continuing on for a while, and they contacted the radio station, and they told the radio station that they would boycott all the sponsors. Well, luckily the radio station understands that to have an interesting radio show, you have to be controversial. In fact, it's in my contract. I have to be controversial. I have to be entertaining. So they backed me up as well. So the people who were trying to go after the radio station realized, well, that wasn't working. They realized going after my sponsors was not working. But the thing is that it happened. It happened. And there's a lot of people out there who, if they didn't have my reputation, and that's what really saved me, because this is a generational thing as well as it is a ideological thing. Most of these people in BLM and Antifa here, they're 30 years and younger. And they didn't know who I was. Not that I'm really anybody. I'm nobody, just like everybody else. But I do have a few claims to fame. And one of them is I helped with the saving of the Coquille Valley from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service expansion. I specifically was the only one who went out and collected signatures to stop the Bandon lighting ordinance. Get this. Bandon had a lighting ordinance. We're in the middle of the darkest place on the earth here, out in the middle of Bandon. We're surrounded by 60-foot trees, and it's usually cloudy at noon. It's sunny today, thank goodness. God loves us today. but usually it's dark here. And the city council wanted to pass a lighting ordinance, which was being pushed by an Agenda 21 organization. It was part of ICLEI. If you know who ICLEI is and you know about Agenda 21, this was an organization. It's called the Dark Sky Alliance. You can look it up. And so they got a bunch of liberals here in Bandon, because Bandon is the little haven, liberal haven down here in Coos County. And so you would only have been allowed two 60-watt bulbs on your property, and everything else, including exterior lighting or those floodlights, security lights, would all be illegal. And it was just ridiculous. We were the only city, because I went out and I got it. I filed a referendum on it, collected the signatures in 30 days. We put it on the ballot. It failed by 55%. 45% of the people are crazy here in Bandon and want to live in the dark, but at least 55% of them don't. And the big thing about that is we are the only city in the entire United States who has ever defeated the Dark Skies Ordinance, which is kind of an ominous name for a bill. Dark skies. It's a dark winter. We're having dark skies. We're all living in caves. So they didn't know, the local Antifa and the local Black Lives Matter, they didn't know some of the things that I've done. And as Steve Brock said, I was the gentleman who brought forward the Second Amendment Preservation Ordinance that passed here in 2015. It was a very popular ordinance. And then in 2018, we had 10 of them on the ballot and 8 of the 10 passed. So I have a little bit of claim to fame, and people didn't realize in this group, this Antifa and BLM group, because they were all 30 and under, they don't know who I am. They thought that they were going to be able to just march all over me. But what they found out is that this young guard came up against the old guard, and they completely got stomped. They are now the people who are afraid to come out in the community now. We've got them so afraid because people are now attacking them on Facebook. They're now attacking them in the grocery stores. And the great thing about living in a small county is we had a rally, and I had Patriot Prayer leader Joey Gibson come out here to that rally. And of course, they called me a Nazi, a fascist, and all kinds of horrible things. And they said that the Antifa was going to show up and they were going to throw bottles of urine on us and all kinds of crazy stuff. Well, when they showed up, we made sure and got pictures of every single one of them. And within a couple of weeks, I had several parents, uncles, aunts, all kinds of people calling me saying, yeah, that's my niece who's involved with that. That's my brother who's involved with that. So I made sure and let those people know, you've got to get to those people. You've got to get to your cousin. You've got to get to your brother, and you've got to stop them from practicing this ideology. But what had happened even more so is that these kids didn't realize who I was in the county and the role I played. And they didn't realize that there was going to be a lot of people who protected me, but they weren't protecting me. They were just protecting the First Amendment because they saw that I was just a representation that was being attacked because of my First Amendment beliefs and the way I espouse things and espouse my opinion. So people realized that in the county. So it wasn't because they were defending me. They were defending our right to be able to participate in the system without having to worry about losing our livelihood, losing our businesses. And it's something that is terribly scary to people out here in the rural area, because most people out here depend on a small business. Like I was talking about the truckers, they're loggers, they're mechanics, they're machinists, they work on the boats, they work out in the forest. These are people who work with their hands, and just to threaten these people's job, well, it's absolutely ludicrous. So I want you to know that it's almost impossible to defeat these people in areas like in Portland until we start getting more, people involved and motivated. But what we did here in Coos County is we've got the Patriot Group moving. They're growing every single day. They're growing. We're getting all kinds of volunteers, and people are starting to stand up. And not only that, we've got people who are meeting in the churches. We had several churches. One of them is the Restoration Worship Center right up the street. And I remember when they still had the governor's order in place where you could only have so many people in the church and you had to wear a mask. I went to a meeting where they asked me to speak at the meeting. And the first thing I said is, you know, if I would have known going to church would have been breaking the law, I would have bought a church a couple of years ago. I mean, I didn't realize that as sometime in the future, that coming to church was going to be a crime in my own country. I was a lawbreaker. I wasn't wearing a mask. No one was social distancing, but nobody cared. And these are people who've never been involved with politics. And to bring them out because of what they see happening to their community, that's what's happening all over Oregon. So when you hear the news reporting on what's happening in Portland, it's true, it's happening, it's disgusting, but it's not reflective of the overall picture of what's happening in rural Oregon and rural America, because we are becoming very aware of this. And as we've been, you know, and I hate to use the term victims, I've never seen myself as a victim. I've never seen, no, I've never been a victim, but they tried to victimize me. I don't play their game. I'll keep challenging that, and I'm never going to apologize for my beliefs. And I hope everyone holds their ground on that, because it's very important. And that's really my story about cancel culture, is that it can be defeated, but you just have to be brave, and you have to be willing to sacrifice your livelihood, your business, your home, because if they are willing to tell you who you can advertise with, what can they not tell you to do? I don't know. So that's pretty much my spiel on cancel culture, and I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about any questions that you might have.
Well, thanks. That's very interesting. I I wonder, do you think it's easier in a smaller town where people know each other, and where, like in Portland, you know, you could walk down a street in Portland and see people you've never ever seen before and never see again, and you've got more accountability in a small town. Do you think that same approach would work in Portland?
That is the huge problem, is that when you have more people, you're buffered by more people. You've got, you know, 6 degrees of separation. You don't have 6 degrees of separation in Coos County. And that was the funny thing. People were going over from our rally to talk to people they knew on the other side. And they were telling them, look, are you going to throw urine bottles at me? We got to show up at work together on Monday. It's going to be a little awkward. It's going to be a little awkward to have this conversation about you throwing urine on me when we're all at the same job place. You know, it's going to cause a little bit of friction. Well, they didn't think about that when the BLM and Antifa started that here. And in fact, they had a big rally where they brought in people from Eugene and Portland, and there was about 500 of them. And I would say probably about 100 were from the local area. But they were in Coos Bay, and they did a march. And during the march, 30 of the Antifa, 30 to 50 of them broke off and were going downtown Central in Coos Bay, and they were going to tear up the buildings and tear down our firemen's memorial. We had 100 armed patriots standing at one end of the street, blocking both exits. When they came down the center of that street and they saw us standing there, they took them maybe a few minutes. One of the big black guys said, up, well, let's roll it up and get out of here. And they went right back to the march. They know now they can't do what they do in Portland here in Coos County, because we, the people, will not let them. And we got to thank you. I got a call the next day, actually it was an email from Captain Chapinar and the chief of police, thanking me and thanking the Patriots for our professionalism and being courteous to all the officers, because we went out of our way to be peaceful. We were not counter protesters. We were just making sure nothing was destroyed. And the police know that we stopped a huge riot that day. So you can get action when you need it.
Right. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Glenn. Not actually a question, but a comment. You talk about personal attacks. That comes from Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. Rule 12, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it, cut off the support network, isolate the target from sympathy. And there's a couple other points, but you get the idea. And so Saul Alinsky is by no question Marxist, and BHO trained under him in Chicago, so we know the basis of that too.
Right. Everything you said is absolutely right. And that's another advantage we have in small towns is you live in a small community, we depend on each other. So you can't shut one person off without a whole group of people being affected by that. And that was once again, BLM and Antifa underestimating the overall community.
Rob, this is Jerry. Really appreciate your talk. What you described happened in Coos Bay is similar to what happened in Springfield last summer, and the mob has not been back because of that. And I would encourage everybody to look up and Google what happened in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, when Antifa and BLM showed up to try to wreck the town. They had hundreds of people packing AKs and ARs, and they drove those people out of there. And that's what it's going to take. That's the only thing these idiots understand. The police aren't going to help you in a big city. The government's not going to help you. You're on your own when they come for you.
Wait till they call them.
You know, we had the sheriff did and he got in trouble for this a year ago. It was in June. The sheriff who's located in Coquille, which is the county seat, he put out a press release saying that Antifa was coming to town to attack Coquille, and over 300 men showed up with ARs, AKs, you name it, high-powered rifles. Every storefront had 3 or 4 guys standing in front of it, and there was 200 of us at the courthouse ready for action, and nobody ever showed up. And the newspaper, it went to, I think it was Times, it was either the New York Times or one of those, reported, you know, what a bunch of rednecks we are in Coquille. But the fact is we weren't doing anything other than protecting our property.
Frank,
That's what it will take.
Frank,
Yeah, I do have something to say. I'm very happy the citizens got up at the town and had their ARs to block Antifa. But, you know, we're not going to have them much longer if this new Senate and Congress and president have anything to do with it. We won't be there to protect ourselves. But I did have a question I sent out to many people today. And I'm wondering, we have a president that was not elected. He was fraudulently placed into office. Why must we follow any rules, regulations, executive orders by a president that is illegally in office?
You know, that's exactly why I worked so hard to put out the Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance. It's one of the few ordinances which, if you violate the ordinance, the officer or the agency will face a fine and be prosecuted under a Class A misdemeanor. We do not have any duty to follow unconstitutional laws. And you ask what's going to happen when they take our guns away. They're not taking our guns away here. We will live under an illegal federal or state law that's not really a law because it's unconstitutional, because our sheriff and most of our police are still on the side of the citizens. Now, we got a few police officers that we know we can't rely on just by their actions, but because of our sheriff, who he is, he's actually gone through a course with Richard Mack, the Constitutional Sheriff's course. So we believe that eventually it may come down to the point where people may have to defend their firearms and their firearms accessories. You know, but you know that's not how government works. They're going to try to pick us off one at a time. They don't come at you all at once. So it's going to be tricky, but I tell everyone, you have a right to self-defense. You have a Second Amendment rights. Ignore these laws. Stop obeying. I mean, it's like the mask law. It's like these business laws. I don't know if you read about the restaurants in Florence who were just fined for opening up. That was our group here who were the people that they said were threatening the OSHA. We never threatened OSHA. All we did is we were standing outside in front of those restaurants, making sure that OSHA didn't violate their right to not have to be trespassed upon. And we weren't threatening them. We were just letting OSHA know we're not going to put up with them coming out here. And how did they do the inspection and then give the fine? They did it over the phone. They did it over the phone. So luckily, the lady who owns the firehouse and the hen, I forget the other name of the restaurant, they hired Kevin Mannix to defend them. So hopefully Kevin, I know most of you probably know him or know of him. Hopefully he'll do a good job of defending him, and they won't have to pay anything, because that's how it's worked out in Washington State so far.
The lady with Along Came Trudy in Springfield, Kevin Maddox is representing her as well. She's been open during all of this, and a lot of people in the community, I mean, the place has been packed out, people coming in to support her. But I know Kevin Maddox is representing her as well.
I like his name, Mannix. You remember Mannix back in the old days? Joe Mannix?
Yeah.
I'm showing my age. I'm sorry.
Oh, anybody else have any comments or questions or
I got a question. Yes. Hey, Rob, my brother lives in Coquille up on Shelley Road. Been there for 50 years. But anyway, the question I have is under the tax code, can you go after them for their nonprofit status for activity which is within their code for the nonprofit?
I couldn't answer that question, but I would hope so. I would hope that every avenue is I hope the legal professionals take every avenue they can to punish these regulatory agencies. But you know who? It's going to come down to us. We, the
Right.
people, are eventually going to have to stand up and stop these executive orders. You know, I remember when the Bandon redid their declaration of emergency. And I went down there and I objected to it, because literally the mayor can come into my house, seize my property, and I've got very little due process under this declaration of emergency. She can seize my guns according to this declaration of emergency, and I would have to go to court to fight for my rights. Now, does that sound like a free country? It doesn't sound like much of a free country to me, where I have to pay somebody to fight for a right that shouldn't have been violated because of a declaration of emergency that they just expanded a couple of weeks ago. So we need to get into our city councils, we need to get into our county commissioners, and we need to redo those declarations of emergency and limit their authority. Maybe we should just take it away completely.
I've got a quick question. Dick was talking about nonprofits, and Rob, you responded about governmental agencies. Do governmental agencies have a charter that we can use, or nonprofits, 501c3s cannot be political?
Right.
C4s have a little more latitude, but it might be an avenue with organizations that are organized under that tax code, but I don't know how that relates to the government agencies.
You know, I apologize for that. I wasn't answering for a nonprofit. I was answering for, you know, the recourse for a government agency, especially these administrative agencies. For a nonprofit, that's really difficult, because I'm having a problem with a nonprofit. And how many of you go to one of the hospitals or clinics that's managed by Peace Health? I imagine several of you do. Well, they just put out this press release, and it sounded like something straight out of Black Lives Matter, where they're talking about health equity, inclusion, redirecting sources to priority populations without defining those priority populations. And then they did a thing on George Floyd, talking about how he was a victim. They made him a martyr. They condemned the police without them ever being tried. They blamed it on racism, where there's absolutely no racism. If you watch the videos, there's no racism present in what the cops do. And this is being put out by Peace Health, which is a nonprofit that's responsible for managing hospitals all over Oregon and Washington. In fact, they manage Sacred Heart Hospital. And I wrote to him and I said, how do you expect people who have a different opinion, who have a belief in a different political ideology, how are they supposed to feel safe in one of your facilities when you've got people who are doxing our private information, who are denying us certain services, who are able to tell us that we are no longer priority populations? And this is coming from someone who's providing our health care. How can you do this? How can you practice politics when you should stay practicing medicine? And there's very little that recourse a person has against that type of nonprofit. And that's the reason they have these nonprofits, because of that protection.
Hey, can I show you the form? This is Form 13909, tax exempt organization complaint referral. I mean, if you can see that, that number right there, you guys can all get one of these on the web. It's tax form 13909, and it's got a whole boxing of nature of violations. You can turn and report this to the IRS.
I want to hear this.
Yeah.
Tell us more.
Well, it's like directors, officers are using income assets for personal gain, commercial profit, organizations involved in political campaign, in excessive lobbying. And then they have to do their Form 990, which Joe answered to that. Fail to report income, to file federal tax, or engage in deceptive or improper fundraising practices. And there's other, this is
What form is that?
Form 399, Treasury and Revenue Service, tax organization complaint referral. And you can,
I'll be making a complaint. Thank you, sir.
yeah, go on to IRS.gov, the form, print out, the blank form, got a couple of them. You're gonna file for, what was his name? That they were going after him in the Capitol, Oregon. He opened the door, and I these guys' names, quite a few out. I haven't finished it yet. Go online, you can find their addresses and all filed and turn this form. I haven't turned them. I got money I want to turn.
This is the terrible thing about, these types of things. I didn't know that you had that there was a process that you could go through. And now that I know that, I can guarantee you before 5 o'clock a day, I'll be having that form. I will have it filled out, Peace Health, and I will have it filed because they are clearly practicing politics. Thank you, sir.
The representative was near.
Right, that's correct. I couldn't remember the name, yeah.
Thank you. I was just unmuting myself to say.
Well, so if, who's pressing charges that is nonprofit against Neerman? I thought it was the House body itself.
It's all these organizations. No. If you read that list of the people in the paper, there's a listing of all the people that came out. I have it in there on the other desk. It's got every organization that was out against Neerman, and a lot of them are all nonprofits. So this one here is the Oregon League of Conservation Voters, with 321 Southwest Forest Avenue, Suite 600, Portland, 97204. Because see, you have to look up what their main objective is in their charter, and if their main objective is a nonprofit situation. Here it is, Susanna Morgan, CEO, Oregon Food Bank. That's a nonprofit.
Yep.
Judy Margles, Director of Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. That's a nonprofit. And this is the whole list that was in the Register Guard. It was published Tuesday, January 26, 2021.
So they have filed a class action against Neerman?
Well, I don't know whether they filed it, but they were all come out against it.
They gave it a political opinion, and they're not supposed to delve into politics. When we had a nonprofit, that was the whole deal. We were an education group, and we started our group the same time Jeff Krupp started his during the Tea Party. And remember, he got tagged by the Obama administration's IRS that it was using to go after conservative groups. Well, when we started our nonprofit, one of the things you have to list is what does your nonprofit do? And we listed as weird promoting education and free market environmentalism. And I'm sure sitting back there going, free market environmentalism? Oh, well, I guess it has environmentalism. We'll take it. So.
Well, here's one, the Salem City Councilor, Vanessa Nordyke, she had no business even giving an opinion on that.
No, she didn't.
See, so there are things that need to be addressed right there. So here's a new forum for you to take over.
By this evening, I'll be master of that form. I can guarantee you.
Rob, I'm curious, you know, it's not just in Oregon. Do you think that the cancel culture is nationally organized, or is it more organic in nature?
No, it's yes and no. That's the nice thing that Antifa has. And it's kind of what we're doing here with the Patriots. I always tell them the Patriots are just an idea. They're not an organization, because that's how Antifa has been able to get away with a lot of things that they're getting away with. They keep saying they're not an organization. However, they have meetings, they have chapters, they have a logo. To me, that sounds like an organization. But right now, there are people in Texas who are fighting against the cancel culture. I've got friends in Texas who are libertarians, and other libertarians have become so socialist and so Marxist in their views. It's weird and they have become antagonists against each other. So this is happening all over the country, and it's organic in the sense that ideas are like contagions and they spread like a disease, and that's what's happened. But there is still a bigger group in the background, bigger organizations in the background who are well funded, who have a lot of money, who have a lot of power, and they're able to keep these street groups at arm's length, but yet they're able to get money to them and give them support. So it's guerrilla warfare. It's political guerrilla warfare. And that's when I was a liaison between the Democrats, and they were pretty leftist back then. I remember the Acorn Group. I had friends who were part of the Acorn Group, and these people taught the Saul Alinsky's tactics that we were speaking of earlier. And that's how they can claim that they're not a group, but yet they are. Well, that's the doublespeak they use. So yes, it's organic because it comes spontaneously, but it's not organic because it's a contagion that's infected many of them through bigger organizations that are promoting these ideas. So it's hard to put your finger on it, but it is organic in some places, but in other places it's very well organized and very well funded.
Anybody else have any comments or questions they'd like to bring up?
I was wondering if you have an email address or a website you could be contacted at.
Yes, I do. Rob@robtaylorreport.com, or you can go and catch me on my website at robtaylorreport.com.
Okay.
Just like it says right there, robtaylorreport.com.
There it is.
I'd like to jump in here with something too. You're talking about regulatory agencies. That is a direct outgrowth of the United Nations, and they are taking over our country, and our politicians are sitting back and letting them do that.
Yes. It's death by process.
Thank you for coming.
Administer us to death. They're going to it's the bureaucratization of the United States. They're going to create up so many barriers to everything we do using the behind the scenes administrative system that has been propped up. That's the establishment. That's what the establishment relies on. That's how Kate Brown can send out her brown shirts through OSHA, DEQ. And if you notice, when they tried to enforce these laws, or not laws, they were governor orders against the churches, and the churches stood up. One of the reasons the churches could stand up is because she couldn't use OSHA to go after the churches. She had to use local law enforcement, and local law enforcement, especially here in Coos County, gave her the finger. So that's pretty much where she was at with that.
Thank you.
Hey, Rob, have you gotten involved down there with the severance tax rulings there that the state's trying to pass through, and also the beer tax? Have you pushed that one at all?
Well, the timber tax is huge. I've got a couple of friends who are in the timber industry. And we're already sending in our testimony against the tax that they are trying to impose on us. But this is nothing but that cap and trade, Governor Brown, even though, they lost the cap and trade in the legislature, Governor Brown passed it through executive order, but she couldn't create the funding mechanism. So these taxes that we're talking about is the funding mechanism for the cap and trade that has been administered through governor's orders.
Did you read Todd Payne's letter op-ed in Portland, the Oregonian? He's the CEO of Seneca Sawmill over here in Eugene. And I don't know which day it was, but I was sent a copy. I'm involved in the forestry group, and they sent a copy, and I forwarded that to one of the most liberal, Michael Dembrow. Have you heard of him?
Yes, I have.
And I write him all the time. And I forwarded it to him and asked him what he wanted to do about it.
The people at Seneca Mill have been very instrumental in helping us out with that. I know there's a brother and a sister. She's actually came out and talked to us out here in Coos County from Seneca Mill. And so, yeah, I know that they're out there as active as they can.
Thank you.
This is Glenn again. Given the supermajorities at the state level and the governor such as she is, they've got a pretty good lock, and I'm not totally confident in our election system. How do we start breaking down that monolith?
I think we're going to have to do that one county at a time, and we may have to, and this is something I've been talking about for the last couple of years, is we are a home rule state where counties, if they pass a county charter, it's equivalent to the state constitution. And we're going to have to start electing county commissioners, because those are the ones we can actually have some type of influence over, unless you're in a big county. But it's easier in Coos County to have influence over these county commissioner elections. But we need to start utilizing the home rule charter and creating charters that denies the state the authority to violate our rights. If we can do that, or if cities and counties can do that with illegal immigration, or as such as in the Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance, then we should be able to do that with things like your right to commerce. You have to have the ability to make a living. That is a natural right, to be able to go out and participate in the market. If the market dies, we die. And therefore, it's a natural right that we have to fight for on a county level. And I think that we need to start looking at ways locally to build walls against the administrative arm of the governor and against all the federal rules and laws that are coming out of DC. This is something that you can only do so much, and all politics is local. So I think that we have to utilize whatever we can. And that's something I'm looking into, is creating a charter of rights where things like people can never, ever be declared essential or non-essential. That is the most un-American thing I have ever heard of in my lifetime when they came out with it. Now, it made me pretty angry at Donald Trump when he was talking about people who are essential and non-essential. We're all essential. We're all Americans, and we have rights, and especially the right to the equal application of the law. And if you have essentials and non-essential, that's not equal application of the law. A county charter could put those rights back into it. And yes, you may risk losing state or federal grants, but it would be better to maintain your rights than to lose a little bit of money.
I have another little quick question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Would you make a comment on the possibility of election fraud in our state?
Whether election fraud exists or it doesn't exist, which I do believe it exists, there's very little you can do about it with the mail-in system. I believe that the ballots are being manipulated, are being harvested before they ever get to the county clerks, and therefore you'll never be able to detect that these ballots are fraudulent. And they do it from old folks' homes. They do it in groups. They vote as a block here, like the Coquille Indian tribe. So you have to understand there's always going to be election fraud. So we have to participate at a high rate of level, and we have to be vigilant to it. But we also have to be aware that no matter how we play, We are dealing with bad officials, and they're willing to do anything they can, but that's just part of the game now. That's just what we have to do, and we have to let people know that even though this is going on, you still have to participate. In fact, you have to participate even more so because of the corruption. And so you can defeat that on a local level. I think there's more you could do on a local level, but on a state level, we can't even get a recall for the governor. So I don't know how we'd ever attain any way of, taking care of statewide ballot mishandling.
Well, during the last election, Newt Bueller was called the winner by the online Oregonian, and they had a direct feed to the numbers that were coming in. And I forget the numbers right now, but it appeared Newt Bueller won. Well, all of a sudden, out of some mysterious pot, they got enough numbers to knock Newt Bueller out. And I just don't know where you go to even pursue that, because Newt Bueller didn't, which I was really surprised at.
And
Anyway,
that's a problem.